The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval training facility as Sarah Chen adjusted her gear one final time. At 24, she had already proven herself exceptional in ways that mattered most to the Navy SEALs. Her marksmanship scores ranked in the top 5%, her endurance times consistently beat those of candidates 10 years younger, and her strategic thinking had impressed even the most hardened instructors. What she hadn't yet proven was whether she could survive the psychological warfare that some of her fellow trainees seemed determined to wage against her. Sarah had grown up in a small coastal town in Oregon, where her father ran a fishing boat and her mother worked as a nurse at the local hospital. The Chen family had immigrated from Taiwan when Sarah was 3 years old, and she had learned early that proving herself meant working twice as hard as everyone else. Her parents had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities they never had, and Sarah carried that weight with quiet determination. The decision to pursue Navy SEAL training hadn't come lightly. After graduating from the Naval Academy with honors in engineering, Sarah could have chosen any number of comfortable desk jobs that would have pleased her parents. Instead, she found herself drawn to the ultimate test of military service. The SEALs represented something pure to her, a place where performance mattered more than politics, where excellence was the only currency that counted. Or so she had believed. The reality of SEAL training had been both exactly what she expected and nothing like she had prepared for. The physical demands pushed her body to limits she hadn't known existed. 20-hour days became routine. Sleep became a luxury measured in minutes rather than hours. Her hands bled constantly from rope work, her shoulders ached from endless hours carrying heavy packs, and her lungs burned from underwater exercises that seemed designed to drown the weak-willed. But Sarah thrived on the challenge. Where others complained, she pushed harder. Where others made excuses, she found solutions. Her instructors began to notice not just her performance, but her character. Chief Petty Officer Martinez, a 20-year veteran who had seen hundreds of candidates wash out, started using Sarah as an example during training lectures. "Look at Chen," he would tell struggling trainees. "She's half your size and twice as tough. Figure out what she's doing right, or figure out your way to the door." The attention brought both respect and resentment from her fellow candidates. Most of the men accepted her presence with grudging admiration. They had seen her earn her place through blood, sweat, and an unshakable refusal to quit. But a small group, led by a candidate named Derek Walsh, seemed to view her success as a personal insult. Walsh came from a military family with 3 generations of Navy service. His father had been a SEAL, his grandfather had served in Vietnam, and Derek had grown up believing that certain traditions were sacred. In his mind, women in combat roles represented the decline of everything he held dear about military service. Sarah's success only made his resentment burn hotter. The harassment started small. Equipment would go missing from Sarah's locker. Her gear would be sabotaged in minor ways that could be explained as accidents. During team exercises, Walsh and his followers would subtly exclude her from planning sessions or provide incomplete information that made her look unprepared. Sarah recognized the pattern immediately. She had dealt with discrimination before, though never quite so systematically organized. Her instinct was to document everything and report the harassment through proper channels. But she also knew that being seen as someone who couldn't handle conflict would be more damaging to her career than the harassment itself. So she adapted. She started arriving at the facility earlier to check her equipment twice. She developed backup plans for every exercise, assuming she would receive incomplete information. She documented everything in a private journal, but she didn't report it. Instead, she let her performance speak for itself. The strategy worked, mostly. Sarah's scores continued to improve, and her reputation among the instructors grew stronger. She began to believe that she could outlast the harassment through pure excellence. Walsh and his group would eventually wash out or give up, and she would prove that determination mattered more than prejudice. She underestimated how far they were willing to go. The incident happened during a nighttime navigation exercise in the mountains outside San Diego. Candidates were required to reach a series of checkpoints using only a compass and map, carrying full packs through rough terrain in complete darkness. It was designed to test both navigation skills and mental toughness, as disorientation and fatigue could easily lead to dangerous mistakes. Sarah had completed similar exercises dozens of times. She trusted her equipment, her training, and her ability to stay calm under pressure. What she didn't anticipate was that someone had tampered with her compass, introducing a subtle but consistent error that would gradually lead her off course. By the time she realized something was wrong, Sarah was miles from where she should have been. Instead of the familiar training area, she found herself on a steep slope covered with loose rock. The smart move would have been to stop, reassess her position, and call for help. But Sarah's pride wouldn't let her admit defeat so easily. She decided to climb higher, hoping to spot landmarks that would help her reorient. That decision nearly cost her everything. The rock face was more unstable than it appeared in the darkness. What looked like solid footing crumbled under her weight, sending her tumbling down a steep embankment. Sarah tried to break her fall, instinctively throwing out her right arm to catch herself against a boulder. The sound of bone breaking echoed through the canyon like a gunshot. Sarah's scream followed immediately after, raw and primal, before she could bite it back. Pain exploded through her arm and shoulder, so intense that her vision went white. For several seconds, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but exist in a universe of pure agony. When her vision cleared, Sarah found herself lying at the bottom of a rocky slope, her right arm bent at an angle that made her stomach lurch. Even in the darkness, she could see that the break was severe. Her radio had been damaged in the fall, and her emergency beacon wasn't functioning properly in the canyon. She was alone, injured, and miles from help. The next several hours tested every aspect of Sarah's character in ways that no training exercise ever could. The pain from her broken arm came in waves, sometimes manageable, sometimes overwhelming. She tried to fashion a makeshift sling from her pack straps, but every movement sent fresh spikes of agony through her nervous system. Worse than the physical pain was the psychological pressure. Sarah knew that this injury could end her SEAL training permanently. Even if she recovered completely, the psychological evaluation after a major accident would likely result in her removal from the program. Years of work, sacrifice, and dreams could be over because of someone else's sabotage. But giving up wasn't in Sarah's nature. Using her left hand and her teeth, she managed to create a crude splint for her broken arm. She rationed her water, knowing that she might need to survive until morning before anyone found her. Most importantly, she began to plan her route back to the training facility. Walking with a broken arm through mountain terrain in complete darkness wasn't just difficult, it was potentially fatal. Every step risked another fall that could cause even more serious injuries. But Sarah had learned something important about herself during her months of SEAL training. She was capable of enduring far more than she had ever imagined. She started walking just before dawn, using her left hand to feel her way along the rocky terrain. Progress was measured in yards rather than miles, with frequent stops to rest and reassess her route. The pain in her arm never subsided, but Sarah discovered that she could compartmentalize it, treating it as just another obstacle to overcome rather than a reason to quit. By mid-morning, she had managed to climb back to higher ground where her emergency beacon finally connected with satellite networks. The rescue helicopter found her 3 hours later, still walking steadily toward the base, her improvised sling holding her broken arm against her chest. The paramedics were amazed that she had managed to travel so far with such a serious injury. The doctors at the base hospital were even more impressed when X-rays revealed the extent of the damage. Sarah had walked nearly 15 miles with a compound fracture that had come dangerously close to severing major blood vessels. But Sarah's triumph wasn't measured in miles walked or pain endured. As she lay in the hospital bed, waiting for surgery to repair her shattered arm, she realized that the harassment campaign had actually made her stronger. Walsh and his followers had tried to break her spirit by sabotaging her equipment, but they had inadvertently proven that she possessed something they could never understand: the ability to persevere when everything went wrong. The investigation into the compass sabotage would come later. The confrontations with Walsh and his group would follow. The long road to recovery and return to training lay ahead. But, in that moment, Saracen knew with absolute certainty that she would become a Navy SEAL. They had broken her arm, but they hadn't broken her spirit. And that made all the difference. The doctors worked through the afternoon to repair the damage to Sarah's arm. The surgery required inserting metal plates and screws to hold the fractured bones in place, a procedure that would leave permanent scars and ongoing questions about her physical capabilities. As Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness under anesthesia, she dreamed of the mountains, of the moment when she had refused to give up despite overwhelming odds. When she woke up that evening, her arm was encased in a cast that extended from her shoulder to her fingertips. The doctor explained that full recovery would take at least 6 months, possibly longer. There was a good chance that she would never regain complete range of motion in her right shoulder. For most people, such news would have been devastating. Sarah asked when she could start physical therapy. The nurse checking her vital signs looked surprised. Most patients wanted to know about pain medication or when they could go home. Sarah wanted to know how quickly she could start the process of getting back to full strength. It was a reaction that would define everything that followed. Chief Petty Officer Martinez visited that evening, bringing news that was both encouraging and troubling. The investigation into Sarah's compass had confirmed sabotage. The instrument had been deliberately altered to introduce navigational errors. More concerning, this wasn't an isolated incident. A pattern of harassment and equipment tampering had been uncovered, all targeting female candidates or those from minority backgrounds. "We're going to get to the bottom of this," Martinez promised. "But I need you to know that the command structure is taking this seriously. What happened to you wasn't an accident, and it wasn't your fault." Sarah appreciated the support, but she was more interested in discussing her future in the program. The injury would force her to recycle, starting over with a new class of candidates after her recovery. It meant additional months of training, more time away from her family, and the psychological challenge of proving herself all over again to new instructors and classmates. "Are you sure you want to continue?" Martinez asked gently. "There's no shame in accepting a transfer to another program. You've already proven more than most candidates ever will." Sarah's response came without hesitation. "I didn't come this far to quit because someone tried to sabotage me. If anything, this makes me more determined to finish." Martinez nodded, unsurprised by her answer. In his 20 years of training SEALs, he had learned to recognize the candidates who possessed something extra, an inner strength that couldn't be taught or faked. Sarah had that quality in abundance. Over the following days, Sarah received visits from fellow candidates, instructors, and even some senior officers who had heard about her ordeal. Most offered support and encouragement. A few questioned whether she should continue, suggesting that her injury proved women weren't suited for SEAL training. Those comments only strengthened Sarah's resolve. She began planning her recovery with the same methodical approach she brought to every challenge. Physical therapy would start as soon as the doctors cleared her. She would study tactical manuals and technical specifications to maintain her edge during the months away from active training. Most importantly, she would use this time to prepare mentally for the challenges that lay ahead. Because Sarah understood now that becoming a Navy SEAL wasn't just about passing the physical tests or mastering the technical skills. It was about proving that she possessed something deeper, the ability to overcome not just external obstacles, but the deliberate efforts of others to see her fail. They had broken her right arm, thinking it would break her spirit. Instead, they had given her something more valuable than any training exercise ever could: absolute certainty in her own strength and determination. The real test wasn't behind her. It was just beginning. The physical therapy clinic at Naval Medical Center San Diego buzzed with activity every morning at 6. Wounded warriors from all branches of service worked alongside each other, pushing their bodies back toward functionality through sheer determination and professional guidance. Sarah Chen had become a familiar sight among the regulars, arriving early and staying late, attacking her rehabilitation with the same intensity she had brought to SEAL training. 3 months after her surgery, Sarah's right arm remained a constant reminder of how quickly everything could change. The cast had been removed, revealing a limb that looked foreign to her, thinner than before, marked with surgical scars, and capable of only limited movement. Simple tasks like brushing her teeth or tying her boots required conscious effort and planning. More complex movements, like the rope work essential to SEAL operations, seemed impossibly distant. But Sarah had learned something important about rehabilitation. It was just another form of training, with different metrics and different goals, but requiring the same mental approach that had carried her through every previous challenge. Where other patients focused on returning to their pre-injury baseline, Sarah aimed to become stronger than she had ever been before. Dr. Patricia Reeves, Sarah's lead physical therapist, had worked with military personnel for 15 years. She had seen every possible response to serious injury: denial, anger, depression, acceptance, and, occasionally, something approaching transcendence. Sarah fell into the last category, treating her broken arm not as a limitation to overcome, but as an opportunity to develop capabilities she had never needed before. "Your range of motion is improving faster than we expected," Dr. Reeves noted during a session focused on shoulder mobility. "But you're pushing harder than necessary. Healing takes time, and forcing progress can actually set you back." Sarah appreciated the advice, but she had reasons for urgency that went beyond simple impatience. The investigation into the Compass sabotage had expanded into a broader examination of harassment patterns throughout the SEAL training program. Derek Walsh and 2 other candidates had been formally charged with conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. Their trials would begin soon, and Sarah would be called as a key witness. More importantly, a new training class was scheduled to begin in 6 months. If Sarah could complete her rehabilitation in time, she would have the opportunity to restart her SEAL training with a fresh group of candidates. Missing that window would mean waiting another year, and Sarah wasn't certain she could maintain her mental edge through such a long delay. The prospect of testifying against Walsh and his conspirators created its own set of challenges. Military justice moved slowly, and the defense attorneys had made it clear they would challenge every aspect of Sarah's account. They would argue that her injury was the result of poor judgment rather than sabotage, that her accusations were motivated by an inability to accept personal responsibility for failure. Sarah knew the legal battle was about more than just her individual case. The outcome would influence how the Navy handled similar situations in the future, potentially affecting every woman who aspired to serve in combat roles. That knowledge added weight to every day of her recovery, knowing that others were watching to see whether she would persevere or give up. The psychological pressure might have been overwhelming if Sarah hadn't found an unexpected source of support among her fellow patients at the medical center. The rehabilitation clinic brought together service members from every branch of the military, each dealing with injuries that threatened to derail their careers. Despite their different backgrounds and circumstances, they formed a community united by shared experience and mutual determination. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had lost her left leg to an improvised explosive device in Afghanistan. She was learning to walk again with a prosthetic limb, determined to return to active duty as a military police officer. Petty Officer First Class James Kim was recovering from traumatic brain injury sustained during a training accident. His speech was still halting, his balance uncertain, but his commitment to returning to submarine duty never wavered. These men and women became Sarah's daily inspiration. Their injuries were more severe than hers, their paths back to full duty more uncertain, yet none of them had given up. During lunch breaks and evening sessions, they shared stories, offered encouragement, and created an environment where pushing through pain was simply expected rather than heroic. "You know what I realized?" Rodriguez said one afternoon as she worked on balance exercises with her prosthetic leg. "Our injuries don't define our limits. They just change the methods we use to achieve our goals." Sarah carried that insight into every aspect of her rehabilitation. When traditional exercises proved too painful for her damaged shoulder, she worked with Dr. Reeves to develop alternative approaches. When her grip strength lagged behind expectations, she incorporated additional hand and wrist exercises into her routine. Most importantly, when doubt crept into her thoughts during particularly difficult sessions, she reminded herself that adaptation was just another military skill to master. The legal proceedings began 4 months into Sarah's recovery. The courtroom at Naval Base San Diego was packed with observers, fellow SEAL candidates, training instructors, legal officers, and media representatives who had learned about the case. The military's handling of harassment and discrimination had become a national issue, and Sarah's case represented a test of whether the system could deliver justice fairly. Taking the witness stand with her arm still noticeably weaker than before, Sarah felt the weight of expectation from everyone in the room. Defense attorneys would try to portray her as an unreliable narrator, someone whose judgment had been compromised by ambition and inability to accept failure. She knew her credibility depended not just on the facts of her testimony, but on how she presented herself under pressure. "Can you describe the condition of your compass on the night of your injury?" the prosecutor asked, beginning with the technical evidence that formed the foundation of the case. Sarah's response was precise and methodical. She described finding the compass in her assigned locker, checking its function during daylight hours, and noticing that it seemed to be working normally. She explained the gradual realization that her navigation was consistently off course, and the decision to climb higher ground that ultimately led to her fall. The defense attorney's cross-examination focused on Sarah's decision-making during the exercise. Why hadn't she stopped immediately when she realized she was lost? Why had she chosen to climb unstable terrain in darkness? Wasn't it possible that her injury resulted from poor judgment rather than equipment sabotage? Sarah had prepared for these questions during countless sessions with the prosecutor. Her responses acknowledged that she had made calculated risks based on incomplete information, but emphasized that every SEAL candidate was trained to push through uncertainty and find solutions rather than simply calling for help at the first sign of difficulty. The harassment campaign wasn't designed to cause physical injury, Sarah testified. It was designed to create a pattern of small failures that would make me appear unsuitable for SEAL training. When the compass sabotage didn't produce the intended result, I ended up in a situation where my training actually worked against me. The technical evidence supported Sarah's account. Forensic examination of the compass revealed deliberate alteration of its magnetic properties, changes that would have been virtually impossible to detect without specialized equipment. Multiple witnesses testified about the systematic harassment campaign, providing context that transformed the compass incident from an isolated prank into part of a coordinated effort to force Sarah out of the program. Derek Walsh's testimony proved to be his own downfall. Under cross-examination, he became defensive and angry, making statements that revealed the depth of his resentment toward women in combat roles. His claim that he was protecting military traditions rang hollow when contrasted with Sarah's composed professionalism. The court-martial panel deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts against all 3 defendants. Walsh received a sentence that included dismissal from service and 6 months confinement. His co-conspirators received lesser punishments but were also removed from SEAL training permanently. Sarah felt satisfaction at the outcome, but also a strange sense of emptiness. The legal victory vindicated her account and might prevent similar harassment in the future, but it couldn't give her back the months of training she had lost or remove the uncertainty about her physical recovery. More importantly, she realized that proving others were wrong about her abilities was far less meaningful than proving to herself what she could accomplish despite their efforts to stop her. 2 weeks after the court-martial concluded, Sarah received medical clearance to begin modified physical training. Her right arm had regained most of its strength and range of motion, though Dr. Reeves cautioned that it would probably never be quite the same as before the injury. The shoulder joint showed signs of arthritis that might worsen over time, and certain movements would always be more difficult. Sarah's response was to immediately sign up for the next available SEAL training class. Chief Petty Officer Martinez visited her the day before training was scheduled to resume. He brought news about the new class Sarah would be joining, 42 candidates from diverse backgrounds, including 3 other women who had earned their places through the same rigorous selection process Sarah had completed years earlier. "These candidates know your story," Martinez warned. "Some will respect what you've been through. Others might see you as damaged goods or a distraction. You'll need to prove yourself all over again, and this time everyone will be watching for any sign of weakness." Sarah understood the challenge, but she also recognized an opportunity. Her injury and recovery had taught her things about perseverance that couldn't be learned through normal training. She had discovered reserves of mental strength that she hadn't known existed. Most importantly, she had learned that external validation mattered far less than internal certainty about her capabilities. The night before returning to training, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, looking at the scars on her right arm and reflecting on everything that had brought her to this moment. The harassment, the sabotage, the injury, the recovery, all of it had been designed to convince her that she didn't belong in the SEAL program. Instead, it had convinced her that she belonged there more than ever. Saracen had something now that couldn't be taken away by sabotage or broken by injury: absolute confidence in her ability to overcome whatever obstacles stood between her and her goals. They had tried to break her spirit by breaking her arm. They had succeeded only in making her stronger. The next morning, Sarah reported for duty at 0500 hours, ready to begin SEAL training for the second time. Her right arm was fully functional but forever changed. Her perspective was sharper, her determination deeper, and her understanding of what it meant to be a SEAL more complete than any training manual could provide. The real test wasn't whether she could pass the program. It was whether she could inspire others to reach beyond their perceived limitations and discover what they were truly capable of achieving. Sarah had learned that becoming a SEAL meant more than mastering skills or passing tests. It meant becoming the kind of person who never gave up, no matter what forces aligned against success. And, in that regard, her training was already complete. The alarm clock showed 0430 when Sarah's eyes opened in the darkness of her base housing apartment. No snooze button, no gradual awakening, just the instant alertness that had become second nature during her months of recovery and preparation. In 30 minutes, she would report for her first day with Training Class 247, beginning SEAL training for the second time with a group of candidates who knew her story but had never seen her performance. Sarah moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, her right arm functioning normally despite the subtle stiffness that would always remind her of that night in the mountains. She had learned to compensate for the minor limitations, developing new techniques for equipment handling and rope work that were often more effective than her original methods. Physical therapy had ended 3 months ago, but Sarah continued the exercises religiously, treating her rehabilitation as an ongoing process rather than a completed task. The walk across base to the SEAL training facility took 12 minutes, a route Sarah had memorized during her previous time in the program. But everything felt different now. The nervous anticipation that had characterized her first attempt had been replaced by quiet confidence born from surviving something that should have ended her dreams. She knew exactly what lay ahead, understood the physical and mental challenges in ways that no amount of preparation could have taught her before. The 41 other candidates in Class 247 were already assembled when Sarah arrived at the training area. She recognized the types immediately: college athletes convinced of their physical superiority, prior service personnel with combat experience, young men who had dreamed of becoming SEALs since childhood. What struck her most was how young they looked, though many were actually older than she was. Sarah felt ancient by comparison, aged not by years but by experience that had tested every aspect of her character. Chief Petty Officer Martinez stood before the group as he had hundreds of times before, his weathered face showing no emotion as he surveyed the new candidates. His eyes lingered on Sarah for just a moment longer than the others, a subtle acknowledgement of shared history, before he began the speech that every SEAL candidate heard on their first day. "Look around you," Martinez commanded. "Statistically, fewer than 20% of you will complete this training. Some will quit today. Others will last weeks or months before they ring the bell. The few who make it through will have proven they possess something that can't be taught, faked, or borrowed from others." Sarah had heard these words before, but they carried different weight now. During her first attempt, she had focused on becoming part of that successful minority. Now she understood that the training itself was less important than what it revealed about each candidate's character. SEAL training didn't create warriors, it identified people who already possessed the qualities necessary for success and gave them the skills to apply those qualities effectively. The physical testing began immediately. Push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, swimming, running, the same standards that had challenged Sarah years earlier, but which now seemed almost routine. Her scores were solid but not spectacular, hampered slightly by lingering limitations in her right shoulder. More importantly, her approach was completely different. Where once she had pushed herself to exhaustion trying to achieve maximum performance, now she focused on steady, sustainable effort that preserved energy for the challenges that mattered most. Several candidates immediately distinguished themselves as physical standouts. Michael Torres, a former Division I wrestler, dominated every strength-based exercise. James Liu, who had run track at the Naval Academy, set a blistering pace during the initial running assessment. Robert Tank Williams, a prior service Marine, attacked every challenge with aggressive intensity that impressed the instructors. Sarah watched these performances with interest but no concern. Superior physical ability provided an advantage during early training, but SEAL selection ultimately tested mental resilience more than physical capability. The candidates who survived would be those who could maintain their performance when exhausted, injured, stressed, and pushed far beyond their comfort zones. The first real test came during the second week, when the class was introduced to surf passage in the frigid Pacific Ocean off Coronado Beach. Candidates were required to carry an inflatable boat through pounding waves, work as a team to navigate beyond the surf zone, then return to shore without losing equipment or personnel. The exercise was designed to be deliberately chaotic, with instructors creating additional stress through constant criticism and impossible standards. Sarah's boat crew included Torres, Lou, and 3 other candidates who had shown strong individual performance during the previous week's training. As the boat crew leader, Sarah's job was to coordinate their efforts and ensure mission success despite the instructor's interference. It was her first opportunity to demonstrate leadership skills to classmates who viewed her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The initial attempts went poorly for every boat crew. The waves were particularly large that morning, the water temperature barely above 50 degrees, and the instructors seemed determined to find fault with every decision. Boats capsized repeatedly, dumping candidates into the churning water where they struggled to recover their equipment while being screamed at by their trainers. After the third failed attempt, Sarah gathered her boat crew for a quick conference. While other teams focused on the technical aspects of boat handling, Sarah addressed the psychological challenge they were facing. "Stop trying to satisfy the instructors," she told her teammates quietly. "They're not looking for perfection. They want to see how we respond when everything goes wrong. Focus on taking care of each other and completing the mission, not on avoiding criticism." The advice proved transformative. During their next attempt, Sarah's boat crew maintained composure when their boat flipped in the surf zone. Instead of panicking or arguing, they worked methodically to right the vessel and continue the exercise. When Lou became disoriented in the cold water, Torres immediately moved to assist him without waiting for orders. When their paddle broke during the return trip, they adapted their technique rather than giving up. Chief Martinez watched the evolution with growing interest. Sarah's leadership style was completely different from what he typically saw in SEAL candidates. She didn't dominate through superior physical performance or aggressive personality. Instead, she created an environment where her teammates could perform at their best, anticipating problems and developing solutions before crises developed. More importantly, Sarah demonstrated something that couldn't be taught: the ability to remain calm and effective when others were losing control. While candidates in other boat crews argued, blamed each other, or simply gave up when faced with repeated failures, Sarah's team maintained their focus and continued to improve their performance. The real breakthrough came during the 4th week of training, when the class was introduced to night navigation exercises similar to the one that had ended Sarah's first attempt. Candidates were required to find their way through challenging terrain using only map and compass, carrying full equipment loads over distances that tested both navigation skills and physical endurance. Sarah felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety as she prepared for the exercise. This was the type of challenge that had nearly ended her military career, and she knew her classmates would be watching carefully to see how she performed. Some probably expected her to struggle, assuming that her previous injury indicated some fundamental weakness or poor judgment. Instead, Sarah's performance was flawless. Her navigation was precise, her pace steady, and her equipment management efficient. More importantly, she demonstrated situational awareness that impressed even the instructors. When she encountered terrain that seemed unsafe in darkness, she found alternative routes rather than taking unnecessary risks. When her compass readings seemed inconsistent, she used backup navigation methods to verify her position before proceeding. Other candidates began to notice Sarah's competence and seek her advice. Lou, who had struggled with navigation since the beginning of training, asked Sarah to explain her techniques during a break between exercises. Torres, despite his superior physical abilities, found himself falling behind Sarah's steady pace and asked for guidance on energy management. Sarah shared her knowledge freely, understanding that SEAL training was ultimately about building teams rather than identifying individual heroes. The candidates who succeeded would be those who could work effectively with others, and helping her classmates improve their performance only strengthened the entire group. The transformation in group dynamics became apparent during the 5th week, when the class faced their first major team challenge. The exercise required candidates to transport heavy equipment across a series of obstacles while maintaining precise timing and coordination. Previous classes had typically approached such challenges through trial and error, with stronger personalities dominating decision-making and weaker performers being marginalized. Sarah's approach was systematically different. She spent time understanding each team member's strengths and limitations, then developed plans that maximized everyone's contributions. When conflicts arose, she addressed them directly but without creating lasting resentment. Most importantly, she demonstrated by example that leadership meant serving the team's needs rather than promoting her own interests. The results spoke for themselves. Class 247 completed the team challenge faster than any group in recent memory, with 0 safety violations and unprecedented coordination between team members. Chief Martinez noted in his training reports that the class had developed unusual cohesion for such an early stage of the program. But Sarah's most significant impact came in areas that were harder to measure statistically. Candidates who had been struggling with confidence began to improve their performance as they received patient coaching from their classmates. Natural athletes learned to value skills beyond pure physical ability as they watched Sarah excel through superior preparation and mental resilience. Most importantly, the entire group began to understand that SEAL training was about becoming part of something larger than individual achievement. The change wasn't lost on the instructors. Veteran trainers had seen thousands of candidates pass through the program, and they recognized when something unusual was happening. Class 247 was developing characteristics typically associated with operational SEAL units: mutual support, shared responsibility, and collective commitment to mission success. Chen is turning this class into something special, Martinez observed to his fellow instructors during a weekly assessment meeting. She's not just succeeding individually. She's making everyone around her better. Sarah was unaware of the instructors' discussions, focused entirely on the daily challenges that continued to test every aspect of her preparation. But she could feel the change in her classmates' attitudes. Where once they had viewed her with curiosity or skepticism, now they sought her input on everything from technical procedures to personal challenges. More importantly, Sarah realized that her injury and recovery had given her something invaluable: perspective on what really mattered during SEAL training. The physical challenges were significant but temporary. The technical skills could be learned through practice and study. But the mental attributes that separated successful candidates from those who quit could only be developed through facing genuine adversity and choosing to persevere despite overwhelming pressure. Sarah had faced that test in a canyon outside San Diego, with a broken arm and no guarantee that anyone would find her before it was too late. Every subsequent challenge in SEAL training seemed manageable by comparison. Her classmates were just beginning to discover their own limits, while Sarah had already proven to herself that she could exceed any limitation that others tried to impose on her. As Class 247 approached the halfway point of their training, Sarah understood that her real victory wasn't measured by personal achievement. It was measured by the transformation she had helped create in an entire group of future SEALs. They had tried to break her spirit by breaking her arm. Instead, they had created a leader who could inspire others to achieve things they had never thought possible. And that was a victory that no amount of harassment or sabotage could ever take away. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly before Class 247 as they prepared for Hell Week, the legendary 5-day crucible that separated SEAL candidates from everyone else who had ever dreamed of earning the Trident. Sarah Chen stood with her classmates on the beach at 0400 hours, watching the sun paint the horizon in shades of gold and crimson that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. Instead, the sunrise marked the beginning of what many would remember as the most difficult experience of their lives. 18 weeks of training had reduced the original 42 candidates to 28, with departures coming at a steady but not unexpected rate. Some had quit during particularly challenging exercises, realizing that SEAL training demanded more than they were prepared to give. Others had been removed due to injuries or performance deficiencies that couldn't be overcome through determination alone. The candidates who remained represented a distillation of physical capability, mental resilience, and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Sarah had watched each departure with mixed emotions. She understood that not everyone was suited for SEAL service, and there was no shame in recognizing personal limitations and choosing different paths. But she also knew that some of the candidates who had quit possessed the fundamental qualities necessary for success, lacking only the absolute certainty in their own capabilities that separated those who persevered from those who gave up when the pressure became overwhelming. Hell Week was designed to identify which candidates possessed that certainty and which had been sustained by hope alone. 5 days and nights of continuous training, with perhaps 4 hours of total sleep, would strip away every pretense and reveal each candidate's true character. Sarah had heard countless stories about Hell Week from instructors and prior graduates, but she also understood that no description could fully capture the experience. The first evolution began with the class lined up in the surf, arms linked, while instructors screamed instructions that changed faster than the candidates could process. Cold Pacific waters surged around their legs, each wave higher than the last, soaking their uniforms and filling their boots with sand that would remain there for the next 5 days. The physical discomfort was immediate and intense, but Sarah recognized it as just the beginning of a systematic campaign to overwhelm every aspect of human endurance. "This is your last chance to quit with dignity," Chief Martinez announced over the chaos of crashing waves and shouting instructors. "Hell Week hasn't officially started yet. Ring the bell now, and you can go home knowing you gave it your best effort. Stay, and you'll face 5 days that will test everything you think you know about yourself." Sarah felt the familiar surge of determination that had carried her through every previous challenge. The broken arm, the months of rehabilitation, the long journey back to this moment, all of it had been preparation for this test. She understood now that Hell Week wasn't really about physical endurance or technical skills. It was about discovering whether she possessed the fundamental qualities that made someone a SEAL, qualities that couldn't be faked or borrowed but had to come from deep within each candidate's character. The first 24 hours established a rhythm of controlled chaos that would continue throughout the week. Boat crew races through pounding surf, combat conditioning exercises in sand pits, long runs in soaking uniforms, technical classes where exhausted candidates struggled to absorb critical information while fighting to stay awake. The instructors maintained constant pressure, creating artificial crises and impossible standards that forced candidates to perform while their judgment was compromised by fatigue and stress. Sarah's boat crew had evolved into a tightly coordinated unit that functioned almost intuitively after weeks of training together. Torres continued to provide raw strength for the most physically demanding tasks. Lou had overcome his initial navigation difficulties to become their most reliable technical specialist. Williams brought combat experience that proved valuable during tactical exercises. 2 newer team members, Johnson and Rodriguez, had integrated seamlessly into the group's collaborative approach. But Sarah's role as boat crew leader proved most crucial during the psychological warfare that formed Hell Week's foundation. While other boat crews began to fracture under pressure, arguing about strategy or blaming individual members for group failures, Sarah's team maintained their cohesion through her steady leadership and example. "Stop thinking about the next 4 days," she told her teammates during a brief rest period after 18 hours of continuous training. "Focus on the current evolution. Complete this challenge, then worry about the next one. Everything else is just noise designed to make us quit." The advice proved essential as Hell Week progressed and the physical demands intensified. Candidates who had seemed invincible during earlier training began to show signs of breakdown. Some developed stress fractures from endless running on sand and pavement. Others suffered from hypothermia after prolonged exposure to cold water. Most significantly, many began to doubt their ability to continue, creating mental cracks that the instructors exploited with surgical precision. Sarah felt the same physical deterioration affecting everyone else. Her right arm ached constantly from the repetitive stress of boat carrying and obstacle navigation. Her boots had rubbed blisters that broke and bled, then formed again as scar tissue. Sleep deprivation created a constant fog that made simple tasks require enormous mental effort. But her experience recovering from her injury had taught her something invaluable. Pain and discomfort were temporary conditions that could be endured rather than permanent limitations that required surrender. The turning point came during the third night, when exhaustion and hypothermia combined to create genuine medical emergencies among several candidates. The instructors maintained their pressure while monitoring each candidate carefully, ready to intervene if anyone's health was actually threatened. But they also used these moments to test each candidate's response to genuine crisis rather than artificial stress. Sarah's boat crew was struggling through a night navigation exercise when Johnson collapsed from a combination of exhaustion and dehydration. The easy response would have been to call for medical assistance and continue the exercise with reduced personnel. Instead, Sarah made a decision that demonstrated her understanding of SEAL values. She reorganized the team to carry Johnson while continuing the mission, refusing to leave a teammate behind despite the additional burden it created. The decision cost her boat crew precious time and energy that they could barely afford. Other teams passed them during the exercise, and the instructors criticized their inefficient approach to mission completion. But Sarah's teammates understood that she had made a choice about what kind of SEAL she wanted to become, prioritizing loyalty and mutual support over individual achievement. Johnson recovered after receiving 4 fluids and rest, but the incident had a profound impact on the entire class. Word spread quickly about Sarah's decision to carry a struggling teammate rather than abandon him for the sake of faster mission completion. Some candidates viewed her choice as evidence of poor tactical judgment. Others saw it as an example of the kind of leadership they wanted to follow into combat. Chief Martinez watched these dynamics with growing appreciation for what was happening in Class 247. Sarah's influence had created a group of candidates who genuinely cared about each other's success, a quality that was essential for operational SEAL units but difficult to develop during training. Her broken arm had become a symbol not of weakness or vulnerability, but of the kind of strength that came from refusing to quit when everything seemed hopeless. The fourth day brought the most challenging evolution of Hell Week, the night boat operation that required precise coordination between multiple boat crews while navigating treacherous surf in complete darkness. The exercise was designed to simulate the kind of high-risk insertion that SEAL teams might face in combat, where failure could result in mission compromise or loss of life. Sarah's boat crew had been designated as the primary assault element, responsible for establishing a beachhead that other teams would use for their own landings. The pressure was enormous, with instructors creating additional stress through constant radio chatter that contradicted previous instructions and artificial time constraints that made careful planning impossible. As her boat approached the surf zone, Sarah realized that conditions were worse than anticipated. The waves were larger and more chaotic than during previous exercises, the tide was running contrary to their planned approach, and heavy clouds had eliminated any ambient light that might have aided navigation. Several boat crews had already failed to complete successful landings, forced to abort their attempts and restart from deeper water. Sarah's decision in that moment would be analyzed and discussed for years afterward in SEAL training circles. Instead of following the prescribed approach that had failed for other teams, she made a real-time adjustment based on her assessment of current conditions. Rather than fighting the tide and waves directly, she used them to assist her boat's approach, timing their final run to shore to coincide with a particularly large wave that carried them over the dangerous surf zone. The technique was risky and unconventional, requiring split-second timing and perfect coordination from her entire boat crew. If executed poorly, it could have resulted in a catastrophic crash that endangered everyone in the boat. But Sarah's teammates trusted her judgment completely, following her commands without hesitation even when they seemed to contradict everything they had been taught about safe boat handling. The result was a textbook combat landing that impressed even the most experienced instructors. Sarah's boat crew reached the beach faster and more safely than anyone thought possible under the conditions, establishing their beachhead with precision that allowed subsequent teams to follow their example. More importantly, Sarah had demonstrated the kind of tactical innovation and leadership under pressure that distinguished truly exceptional SEAL officers. The final day of Hell Week took on an almost surreal quality as physical exhaustion reached levels that seemed to transcend normal human experience. Candidates moved like zombies, responding to commands through muscle memory rather than conscious thought. Simple tasks that would normally take minutes required tremendous effort and concentration. The line between awake and asleep became meaningless as candidates hallucinated and lost track of time. But Sarah discovered something remarkable during those final hours. Her body had adapted to function at levels of deprivation that would have been unthinkable before Hell Week began. The broken arm that had once seemed like an insurmountable obstacle now felt like just another part of her body, no more significant than any other minor imperfection. More importantly, she had learned to access reserves of mental strength that existed far beyond normal conscious awareness. The graduation ceremony for Hell Week was deliberately understated. 23 candidates had completed the full 5 days, with 5 others having been removed for medical reasons or voluntary withdrawal. Chief Martinez presented each survivor with a brown t-shirt that marked their successful completion of the program's most demanding phase, but the real recognition came from their instructors' changed attitude toward them. "You're not SEALs yet," Martinez told the exhausted but triumphant candidates. "But you've proven you have what it takes to become SEALs. The rest of your training will teach you skills and tactics, but your character has already been tested and proven." Sarah felt a profound sense of completion as she received her brown shirt, knowing that she had achieved something that once seemed impossible. The journey from her broken arm in a remote canyon to this moment on the beach had tested every aspect of her character and revealed strengths she hadn't known existed. But her greatest satisfaction came from looking at her classmates and seeing the transformation that Hell Week had created. These weren't the same candidates who had started training months earlier as individual athletes hoping to prove their personal superiority. They had become something more valuable, a team of warriors who trusted each other completely and shared an unbreakable commitment to excellence. 6 months later, Sarah Chen stood at attention with her classmates as they received their SEAL tridents in a ceremony attended by families, friends, and senior military leaders. 21 candidates had completed the full training program, emerging as the Navy's newest Special Operations warriors. Sarah's parents had flown in from Oregon, their pride evident despite their lingering concerns about their daughter's chosen profession. As the commanding officer pinned the golden trident to Sarah's uniform, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. They had tried to break her by breaking her arm, hoping to prove that she lacked the strength to become a SEAL. Instead, they had given her something more valuable than any training could provide: absolute certainty in her own capabilities and unshakable commitment to helping others achieve their own potential for excellence. The broken arm had healed completely, leaving only faint scars as reminders of that night in the mountains. But the lessons learned during her recovery and return to training would last forever. Sarah had discovered that becoming a SEAL wasn't just about personal achievement. It was about becoming the kind of person that others could depend on when everything went wrong. Looking out at her new teammates, Sarah understood that her real journey was just beginning. The SEAL community was small and tight-knit, bound together by shared experiences that created bonds stronger than family. She had earned her place among these warriors through persistence, skill, and an unbreakable refusal to quit when others tried to make her fail. They had broken her right arm, thinking it would break her spirit. Instead, they had created a Navy SEAL who would inspire countless others to reach beyond their perceived limitations and discover what they were truly capable of achieving. And that was a victory that would echo through generations of warriors who followed in her footsteps.